I thought it might be good just to give you a background of my experience in the insurance industry. There are some familiar old faces here, but most of you probably never heard of me or never met me before. So just to let you know a bit about myself, I've worked in underwriting for about 38 years. I was calculating the other day, so I must have started when I was about 5. And I've provided assessments for life, critical illness, income protection, long-term care. Do you remember that industry? That was an interesting one. I've done contract work as well. So totaling up the number of insurers I've worked for or provided services for, it's probably about 17 different companies. All got extremely different ways of going about things. I'd also like to tell you about my own mental illness experiences. What's my connection with mental illness? Well, at the age of 8, my father unfortunately died from non-Hodgkin's lymphoma at the age of 38. So this is back in the... You're going to recognise my age soon, so those of you who are actuaries here might have calculated it already. But back in the 60s, you didn't have the likes of counselling. I wasn't allowed to go to my father's funeral. I was off to school as normal. So it wasn't really until I was in my early adulthood that I came to terms with the grieving process and the bereavement process of losing my father back then. At the age of 30, I went to the crematorium where his name was written in the book. And to actually see those important things, see his name in a book, it wasn't a story that somebody told me, to see his name in the book, Anthony Allen Robertson, had a great impact and a great step forward for me in that grieving process. Relatives, so my sister had a different experience. I guess it was probably connected with the bereavement of our father. She suffered from what was called manic depression back then, and in her teens was sectioned under the Mental Health Act for carrying a firearm in public. My mother has early signs of dementia. She's 88 now, so there's high statistics for that sort of thing. And my wife went through a very traumatic miscarriage. I think in men's thinking, miscarriage is an event that happens on a particular day, and then you finish with that and you probably need to get over it. But miscarriage, my experience of my wife's miscarriage was weeks and weeks of miscarriage stuff. I don't really want to go into the ickies of it. But that's a horrendous time, and the impact of that not having any children at the end of it is quite horrendous. So that's my personal experience with mental illness. Let me just go through what I'd like to cover. I was going to entitle this The Agenda, but here's how it goes. Explain the underwriting process. I'm an underwriter, so I could waffle on all afternoon, but I'll try and do it briefly. Look at medicine. So what's happened in the medics then and now? Where have we got up to with that sort of thing? Look at underwriting in relation to mental illness and also other aspects of underwriting then and now. Where are we up to with those sort of things? And then look at the changes that have been made at Holloway Friendly Society. Very recently, we only launched it in January, so it's new, and also the impact of those changes. So we've got some early statistics coming back as to the impact of what we've done. And then finishing things off with what happens next or the future. So I recognise that some of you haven't worked in the insurance industry, you might not understand what people have been waffling on about insurance. So I thought I'd briefly go through the sort of key players and the process that's involved. So you've got the financial advisor and the underwriter, and then you've got the actuary. Those are broadly the big people involved in setting the pricing, selling the products and making an assessment at the end of the day. And it's a bit like them all being in a car together. So you've got the financial advisor who's got their foot firmly on the accelerator. You've got the underwriter who's got their foot firmly on the brake and the steering wheel. And then you've got the actuary who's looking out the back window, telling them where to go. And that's broadly what it is. The actuary will have set the premium rates, by looking at the historic data. They'll look at the company's expenses and those sort of things, and they'll compile the standard premium rates. Financial advisor will fill in an application form after doing very thorough analysis of somebody's finances and their needs, meeting their needs. They'll fill out an application form and they'll send it off to the insurer, and it'll land on the underwriter's desk, or more naturally now on their screen. Simply normal. Most people, as we've heard earlier, most people are this wonderful phrase, normal or standard rates. No, that doesn't excite anyone, does it, to be offered standard rates? We're perhaps not very good with our interpretation of something that's good for people. I'll talk a bit more about normal a bit later on when I go through the changes that Holloway have made. Let's look back at the world of medicine. So probably prior to all this stuff, people saw it was something overtaking people, a sense of good and evil at large. And people were put in various mental institutes, workhouses, poorhouses, madhouses. They were put in straitjackets. They were chained to radiators. They were put in ice baths. And that one in the middle, bottom middle there, it's Bedlam here, Bethlehem Hospital in London. Back in the day, you could pay a penny. That's how cheap it was then. You could pay a penny and go and see the inmates performing. It was quite horrendous, really. These were supposed to be places of care, and they certainly weren't. But in time, with the development of treatments, the recognition that actually there are classifications of disorders, there are anxiety, there's depression, there's bipolar, etc. The development of medicines to control psychosis, so antipsychotics were used. People were then able to be moved more back into the community under the community mental health services. And they'd offer daycare centres, housing support, those sort of things. So things were moving on quite dramatically in the medicine world. It affects everyone. You might recognise some of these people. This is where my PowerPoint stuff starts coming in tremendously. Whoa, look at that one. Wait for it. Whoa. So you might recognise some of those, and you might recognise that it has had a poor outcome for some of them, or some of them actually deal with it and get on with life. It's not so much of an issue. There's a broad spectrum of issues even on that page. Let's now compare it with what's happened in the underwriting world. Underwriting then and now. So I started off my underwriting career at a company called Britannic Assurance that is no more, but was a well-established company in its day in Birmingham. And we had funeral-based plans. So it was basically life cover, but very low sum assured, very low premiums. And we had a bunch of advisors who would go out and collect these premiums, 50p a week. 50p a week. Was that amazing? You got something like £250 life cover for that. So if you died, that money would go to the beneficiaries. If you had few friends, that would be very good sandwiches. If you had a lot of friends, it's going to be very poor sandwiches. £250 probably doesn't go that far. But as regards the underwriting, it was very broad brush. 50p a week, you haven't got a lot of money to play with. So things like if you were hypertensive and you were on one treatment, you'd be charged 50% extra on the premium. 2 treatments, plus 100%. Oh, amazing stuff. And it was pretty much the same sort of theory for epilepsy and asthma and those sort of things. Very broad brush stuff. Loads of business coming in, everyone was happy, but we weren't offering terms for cancer. We weren't offering terms for diabetes. We weren't offering terms for heart disease or stroke. I haven't described the reinsurers, which are basically insurance for insurance companies. So if you've got a bunch of insurance companies who use one insurer, there's a nice spread of risk, and that's what underwriters like, is spreading the risk, lowering the things down. So if you spread the risk, this is what we started to do with diabetes, stroke, cancer, heart disease. We started to pool these risks. Reinsurers started to pool these risks. So within those pools, you'd have the good, the bad, and the ugly. But overall, you could offer people cover. So we started to offer people cover. So things started to move forward in that sort of area. However, round the corner, GRID. Does anyone remember what GRID stands for? Gay-related immune deficiency. Shock and horror, but that's what we thought it was. It wasn't until it was then called AIDS. We thought, it's nothing to do with the group risk. I do apologise, it's got the same acronym, but it's a different acronym, but totally different page. So gay-related immune deficiency. Can you imagine? So we were focusing on those who are gay. And I do thank Steve Casey for finding this wonderful questionnaire from his archive of rubbish, I guess, but yeah. So poor underwriting, but insurance companies use this. They asked, do you belong or have you ever belonged, the usual insurance terminology. Do you belong or have you ever belonged to any of the following AIDS high-risk groups? Homosexual men, bisexual men, intravenous drug users, haemophiliacs, sexual partners of the preceding groups. Wow. Prior to this, we did also ask how many sexual partners people had, whether they practiced safe sex. It's like phenomenal. Thankfully, we've got rid of all of that, and it's basically, have you tested positive for HIV? That's what we've come to, something sensible. And perhaps this is what we need to think about when we look at various things. We've moved on a bit with AIDS. We haven't got there yet. We're still not offering terms, or not every insurance company is offering terms for somebody who's HIV positive. Mental illness has got left behind. But things are changing. Happy faces there, that's good. So we decided to do something at Holloway Friendly Society. And part of that was looking at what we currently do. So we looked at our questions. And if you look at the questions, you begin to understand they're not adequate enough for this. They're not going to meet or give you different answers. You need to change the question set. I've always seen underwriting as a bit of a science and art. So I understand the scientific data, the stats that we get in, the tables that we use and all that sort of stuff. The underwriter's job is to paint the picture of the individual they're assessing. And it's combining those two together that's quite tricky. You've got the actuary with the science bit, the underwriter trying to fit in the art bit. Does this individual match that scientific data? Bit more PowerPoint stuff there. So we've changed to a new way of doing things as regards mental illness. Sorry, that was me fiddling with the mic there. We found that we needed to understand the whole story. In our current question set, there were things missing, things that we didn't understand, and we needed to develop that. As I looked into it, spoke to experts in the industry and outside the industry, I realised there was a spectrum going on. There wasn't a box. There wasn't the mental illness box. It was a spectrum, and I needed to find out where the individuals were on that spectrum. So could I ask for a raise of hands if you've ever, there's a insurance question, if ever I heard one. Have you ever suffered any of these? I can probably put 3 hands up for this. But just have a look around now, the number of people putting their hands up. And yet we were treating people like they got a mental illness, when in fact it was normal. It's a normal reaction. So that was the area we focused on. We took out bereavement, redundancy, miscarriage, breakdown, blah, 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 the loss reaction. And we had a different set of questions for those people. We're no longer putting them in boxes. We're seeing if that's a normal reaction to an event, that's absolutely fine. We should be offering standard terms for that. What we wanted to do was include people. And we'd lost sight of the shortened application forms, the straight-through processing the companies are aiming for. We'd lost sight of including people. We'd lost sight of being able to get alongside people. and understand them. It was more like we're excluding them because the computer says no. One of the things that really came out after the research was understanding resilience. And I love this quote. It really sort of sums it all up. It's not whether you get knocked down that counts, it's whether you get back up. Trying to understand an individual if they're in that category or if they're close to that category is a hard thing to try and do. But we're trying to do something. We've tried to develop that aspect in our question set. So the latest results. So we've changed. We changed at the beginning of January. We put a new question set out there and we've got some results. And this is so for people who are in these categories who have loss reaction or very mild mental illness, so anxiety, stress, depression, who are controlled on treatment or they've come off treatment and they're still controlled. This is the results. So 70% of people have better terms than they would do 4 or 5 months before. That's us changing our question set. That's us allowing somebody to describe their story. 70% get better terms. That has got to be good news, hasn't it? Let's look at some case studies. So I've got a couple of case studies. I haven't made them up. These are real people who've applied in the last couple of months. Obviously, I've taken their names out for GDPR or whatever. So the first one is a male aged 45. He's a builder and smoker and he's applying for income protection cover. In January 2020, so it shows you how recent it was, he was in shock due to a close friend's death. He spoke to a counsellor about how he felt and had 3 or 4 sessions. No time off work, no medication, no diagnosis, no suicidal thoughts, and good resilience. What would you do? Put an exclusion on maybe for a year? Decline him? Put an exclusion on forever? We actually gave him standard rates. That to us seemed like a normal reaction. Second application, a female aged 49, a vet assistant, coming to us for income protection again. In 2018, she started the process of being divorced and was given sertraline 150 milligrams daily. Her last symptoms were July 2019. She's still on medication, but is looking to reduce now that the divorce has been completed. She had online counselling, no time off work, and her resilience answers were good. Again, what would you do? We decided we would put an exclusion on because she's on treatment and she's looking to come off that treatment, so there may be a reaction to that, but we will be prepared to review in a year or two's time. So these are good results for people who have normal reactions, even though they're still struggling. What's the future look like? Well, it's a bit like we're going on a bear hunt. It's a bit like this message that they keep singing over and over again. We can't go over it, can't go under it, we've got to go through it. It's hard. We understand it's hard and complex, mental illness, and it is a bit like this, though. But we're prepared to do it. We're on a journey. We started off and we're perhaps getting a bit criticised about what we're doing. But that's okay. We'll learn. We'll learn as we go, as long as we're improving things, as long as we're trying to do the right things for the customers. I think it's not so much about the diagnosis. I think it's more about how people come to terms with that. I spoke to somebody the other day and said, well, I think we should be thinking about people who've been diagnosed with schizophrenia. I haven't told them anything else other than schizophrenia. So a diagnosis causes horror to them. Well, you can have very good controlled people who suffer in schizophrenia. What is the problem? It's a change in the industry. It's something we need to look at and address. There are people at the moment we're probably offering the wrong terms for, but we're trying to help. We're trying to improve things. So watch this space. We do recognise that we need to do training. We need to train our underwriters again. We need to train our underwriters not to look at diagnosis as the big thing. We also need to train those financial advisors who maybe specialise in this area train the nurses and the people who collect the information in the first place. All I would ask is that whatever capacity you have, you join in. We can't do this on our own. There's a statement from Bill Richardson, almost a good name. As a politician in America, where else do these statements come from? We cannot accomplish all that we need to do without working together. Thank you.